want to tell you about something I learned recently that stopped me cold. I've been teaching piano for over 30 years, and until very recently, I assumed that when I asked a student to picture in their head where their hand was going, or visualize the shape of a phrase, or imagine notes on the staff, I assumed everyone could do that. Turns out that's not true. One of my students, and someone who is genuinely excellent at articulating her own experience, told me something I didn't expect. She said that she doesn't automatically see pictures in her mind, that visualizing things requires real effort for her, that what I experience is just happening, a mental image appearing, doesn't happen for her automatically. And ironically enough, I also happened at the same time to be going through Molly Gebrian's book and found the chapter that talks about this exact thing, ironically enough, on the same day. And it turns out that there is a spectrum of mental imagery. A meaningful percentage of the population, somewhere between 2 and 15%, depending on how strictly you define it, has significantly reduced or absent visual mental imagery. And it turns out this has a name. It's called aphantasia. And once I understood what it was, I realized I may have been giving unhelpful instructions to some students like this for 30 years without even knowing it. Aphantasia is the condition of reduced or absent voluntary mental imagery, specifically visual mental imagery. People with aphantasia can think about a red apple perfectly well. They know what it is and they can describe it in detail. They understand the concept completely. But when they close their eyes, nothing appears. No image. You might as well say the screen is blank. For most of their lives, people with aphantasia don't know this about themselves. And the reason is simple. Why would you ever discover it? You assume everyone experiences thinking the way you do. It only comes up in a conversation like the one I had with my student, where someone describes what is happening in their mind and something doesn't match. The term aphantasia was only coined in 2015 by neurologist Adam Zeman at the University of Exeter, though the phenomenon was actually first described by Francis Galton as far back as 1880. Galton noted, interestingly, that scientific men as a class had surprisingly feeble powers of visual representation, which suggests that this has always been part of the human cognitive diversity. We just haven't had a name for it or a conversation about it until very recently. The spectrum runs from complete aphantasia, no voluntary visual imagery at all, through varying degrees of reduced imagery, all the way up to what we would call hyperphantasia at the other end, where mental images are so vivid they can almost be indistinguishable from actual visual perception. Most people fall somewhere in the middle, but a significant number are closer to the aphantasia end than anyone has ever told them, and many of them are sitting in piano lessons right now, receiving instructions that don't map onto anything their brain can actually do. Music pedagogy is saturated with visualization instructions. Picture the phrase, see the notes on the staff, visualize where your hand is going, imagine the sound before you play it. These instructions make complete sense if your brain generates mental images automatically. For a student with aphantasia, they're essentially meaningless, not because the student isn't trying, but because the cognitive mechanism those instructions rely on simply isn't available. And here's what makes it particularly tricky. By the time a student reaches adulthood, they've almost certainly developed compensatory strategies for navigating a world designed for people with typical visual imagery. They've been doing it unconsciously for decades, so they may not even be able to tell you that the visualization instruction isn't working. They've gotten so good at finding workarounds that they don't always know they're even doing it. There's an additional layer for music specifically. Some people have not just visual aphantasia, but also auditory aphantasia, a reduced or absent ability to hear music in their head. The concept of audiation imagining a musical phrase before playing it, hearing the music internally, which is considered foundational in a lot of music education, would be essentially inaccessible for someone with auditory aphantasia. This is not a small or obscure issue. It affects a real percentage of your students, and most piano teachers, myself included until very recently, had never been taught to think about it. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and where the news is much better than you might expect. Aphantasia is almost always specific to visual imagery. The other sensory and cognitive pathways are typically intact and often strong. Kinesthetic imagery, the felt sense of movement from inside the body, sometimes what we call muscle memory, is usually fully available. Auditory imagery, hearing the sound in the mind, is usually intact even when visual imagery isn't. Spatial reasoning, the ability to understand and navigate spatial relationships, appears to be largely unaffected by aphantasia. And for piano reading specifically, those three pathways are arguably more important than visual imagery anyway. Kinesthetic imagery means a student can feel what a fifth feels like under their fingers, can sense the physical distance of a position change, can develop proprioceptive awareness of where their hands are in space, all without needing to picture it. Auditory imagery means a student can internalize rhythmic patterns through sound, can develop an ear for intervallic relationships, can connect notation with what someone or something actually sounds like rather than to a mental picture of the staff. Spatial reasoning means that a student can understand the geography of the keyboard, higher, lower, closer, farther, can grasp the spatial logic of music notation, and can orient in musical space without relying on a visual mental image. The task isn't to help a student with aphantasia do something they can't do. It's to stop relying on the one channel that isn't available and deliberately build through the channels that are. So, since this conversation with my student, I've been rethinking some of the language I use instinctively in lessons. Instead of picture where your hand is going, if I know the student, and going forward, I will probably check into this more deeply to try to figure out what channels are more accessible to each student. But if I know that someone has trouble with this, I'm going to ask them to feel the distance before your move instead of picture where your hand is going. Instead of visualize the notes on the staff, I'm asking, what does this interval sound like? What does it feel like under your fingers? Instead of see the shape of the phrase, I'm asking, what do you notice about how this pattern moves, up or down, by step or skip? None of those substitutions lose anything essential. They're just accessing the same understanding through a different pathway, a pathway that's available to everyone in the room, not just the students who happen to generate vivid mental images automatically. This also connects directly to the 6 reading skills I work on with every student. Each of those skills has a kinesthetic component, a spatial component, and an auditory component, not just a visual one. For students who process primarily through one of those non-visual channels, building the skills through the channels isn't a workaround. It may be actually the most direct route. What this has reminded me after 30 years of teaching is that the way I experience learning piano is not the only way the brain can do it. I'm a strongly spatial thinker. Mental imagery comes very easily to me. I've built a teaching approach around the way my own brain works, and for the most part it served my students well, but I've probably been leaving some of them without a complete toolkit. The students who seem to struggle for no obvious reason, who can't quite do what I'm describing, who look slightly lost when I ask them to visualize something, some of those students may not be missing effort or motivation. They may be missing a cognitive channel I never knew I was assuming. And that's worth paying attention to. And it's worth asking your students about. It's something you can explore in lessons that should be helpful to both of you. If any of this resonates with your own experience, if you've always found visualization instructions a little baffling, if you've wondered why certain things that seem to come naturally to other people just don't, you may be further toward the aphantasia end of the spectrum than you realized. And that doesn't mean you can't learn to sight read fluently. It just means the pathway there may look different than what most instruction assumes. If you want to look at what's actually happening in your reading process specifically, which channels are working well and which ones still need development, the reading assessment is a good place to start. The link is below. I'll see you in the next one.